A blare of noise erupted from the Vox unit strung between the pilasters. A glorious scream of birth and murder shrieked in dissonant anti-harmonies, like a million orchestras with every instrument out of tune. The sound was rapturous, a freakish blend of discordant music and howling voices raised in hideous adoration. A cascade of light fell from the dome, a glittering rain that shimmered with a light so bright that it was like a moment of atomic detonation. The Emperor's children howled as sensory apparatus mutilated by Apothecary Fabius flooded their nervous systems with powerful surges of bioelectrical spikes, pleasure responses and pain signals. Warriors convulsed at the cacophony of sound and light, dancing like madmen or victims of grand mal seizures. Some tore at their skin, others beat their neighbours, while others pounded their fists bloody on the floor while screaming inchoate curses. Lucius held his body rigid, fighting the sensations and receiving the pleasure tenfold, his deliberate resistance to the overload of sensation making it all the sweeter. Blood and saliva ran from his lips, and he felt his bones and flesh vibrating in perfect symphony with the raucous madness of the spectacle. The Legion screamed with the delirious joy of it, but this was merely a prelude. A shape moved in the light, an angel of extermination, a god made flesh, and the embodiment of all that was perfect in its expression of intemperance. Fulgrim dropped through the lights like the brightest comet in the firmament, a hammer blow of Tyrian warplate the colour of a bruised sunset. He slammed down onto the terrazzo floor, a billowing mantle of fiery golden scales spread at his shoulders like a pair of angelic wings. Hair like a snowfall cascaded from his noble crown, and his slender aquiline features were tapered and elfin, though possessed of a haughty strength that none of the faded orphans of Assyrian could hope to match. Fulgrim had eschewed his gaudy facial paints and scented oils, his face now pallid and ethereal, like a corpse wraith given form and clad in polished plate that gleamed with the sheen of the finest mirror. His eyes were black pits from which no light escaped, or ever would, and his mouth creased in a smile that spoke of secret knowledge that would sear the mind of any but a Primarch, were they to learn even a fraction of its scope. Lucius joined his fellow warriors in an orgiastic scream of welcome, a hymnal to excess, a chorus of pandemonium in praise of their liege lord. Just to be near the Phoenician fired the blood. Fulgrim stood and spread his arms to accept their devotion, tilting his head back as his full lips parted with the rapture of adoration. The discordia from the Vox dropped in volume, and Fulgrim finally deigned to cast his gaze out amongst his warriors. The golden cloak draped across his shoulders, and the glitter of silver mail beneath his wondrously moulded breastplate shimmered like a waterfall of stars. A scabbard of ebony, mother of pearl and smoked ivory bands hung from a belt of soft black leather, embossed with a buckle of amber and black. The Anthem. Lucius knew this sword well, and even though it now belonged to the most sublime warrior imaginable, he could not resist the thought of what it might be like to face such a weapon. Sensing the scrutiny, Fulgrim turned his obsidian eyes upon Lucius, and smiled as though in recognition of some shared bond known only to them. Lucius felt the power of that gaze, and fought to keep his suspicions from showing on his face. He grinned back at Fulgrim, and sliced the blades of his swords across the skin of his forehead. Blood dripped into his eyes, and he revelled in the bitter, rancid taste of it as it ran down the hundreds of grooves carved through the skin of his face to his waiting tongue. "My children," said Fulgrim, as the glorious madness receded, "I bring you bliss."
Penniless clans, scrappers and scroungers grabbing for any chance at advancement. They'll fall into line, or they'll be destroyed.
He looked up.
You did bring an army, didn't you?
No. Pantheon choked on his wine.
What?
Fulgrim chuckled. There are forces in orbit, should the worst happen, but I intend to accomplish my task with a minimum of effort. The measure of a warrior is in the quality of his victory.
Quality? Are you insane?
Fulgrim paused and gave the governor a long, measured look. Pantheon paled and stepped back.
I meant no disrespect,
he said more quietly. Of course you did. Respect must be earned, and I've done precious little to do so.
You saved my life,
Pantheon protested. Something any one of your guards could have done. Fulgrim waved his further protests aside. No, you are correct. It does seem mad, but you said it yourself. Byzaz is a much smaller part of a larger game, and the stakes I play for are greater than you can imagine. Primary Iterator Pike mentioned that the compliance ceremonies will take place a month from now. Pantheon nodded.
On the anniversary of the Continental Government's founding.
Then in 1 month, this planet will be at peace. Pantheon peered up at him.
You're serious?
He said after a moment. Fulgrim smiled. A month, Hereditary Governor Pantheon. On my honor, as the commander of the 28th Expedition and a son of the Emperor, I will bring this planet into compliance in exactly 1 month. Fulgrim was neither the largest of his brothers nor the most intimidating. He was beautiful and graceful, and those things put the human mind at ease. All but the most wary quickly forgot that he was a Primarch, and not simply exceedingly tall. I came to bring Byzaz into compliance. I would prefer to do so as efficiently as possible. Fulgrim watched the dancers glide gracefully across the floor. Part of him longed to join them, but not now, not today. It does not matter to me who rules, only that they rule in the Emperor's name. Corinth looked away. Our people have no say, then. Which people? Those starving villagers you mentioned, or the patricians who, in their ceaseless politicking, have brought your world to the edge of ruin? Both? All men are the sum of Byzaz, and Byzaz is the sum of all men. Fulgrim looked at him. You sound like a philosopher. One has to be in order to maintain equilibrium here. Reality is a thing of competing disparities. Passing them requires a certain fluidity of thought. Fulgrim chuckled. He'd often thought much the same about his time in the Palace on Terra. Every word he'd spoken was analysed and dissected by 1,000 competing factions, each of them seeking their own advantage. Compliance requires stability. I would prefer to leave Byzaz in better shape than I found it. Meaning? Fulgrim gestured, pleased. It was the opening he'd been waiting for. Improved living and working conditions for the rural population. A lessening of the stranglehold the patricians have on the high-yield industrial farms of the Chalcedonian lowlands and the ore-processing centres in the Anabas Hills. They will still control manufacture of raw material, but have less influence on how it is employed. We will begin a series of reforms designed to strengthen the continental government, so that it is no longer completely beholden to an archaic caste system, designed solely to prop up a few inbred neobarb clans. Fulgrim made no effort to speak quietly. There were ears listening, and he wished for them to hear everything clearly. Obfuscation would only slow compliance. Better to provoke the foolish into action as swiftly as possible. Corinth looked as if he were choking on something. You can't. How? He spluttered, forcing the words out in a tangled rush. Compliance is not solely about forcing worlds to surrender their sovereignty, Belleros. It is also about bringing them enlightenment. It is about showing you, that there is a better way, and that is what I intend to do. My question to you, Belleros, is, will you help me? A startled yelp caught his attention, and he sighed. Someone had got too close to Kasparos, and the legionary had knocked the mortal sprawling. The braver among the citizenry had the inadvisable habit of trying to touch the hulking giants in their ornate armour, to see if they were real, perhaps. Telmar loomed over the stunned man, little more than a youth, really, and seemed poised to finish what he'd begun.
"Calm yourself, Kasparos, or I will do it for you,"
Fabius hissed, as he grabbed the other legionary's shoulder.
"He meant no harm. They are only curious. So we would be in their place. They should keep their hands to themselves," Telmar said, slapping the apothecary's hand away. "As should you, spider."
Fabius stepped back, hands raised.
"I meant no offence, brother. What you mean and what occurs are often two entirely different things," Telmar said. "You should have stayed in your web, spider. You speak softly of them. But look around. You frighten them more than any of us."
"Enough," Fulgrim said, his voice like quiet thunder. The crowd fell silent. "This is not seemly, my sons. Are you children to brawl in front of strangers?"
"My lord, the spider—"
Telmar hesitated, seeing Fulgrim's expression.
"Apothecary Fabius has insulted my person. I would have satisfaction."
His hand fell to the hilt of his sword. Fulgrim sighed. "And how has he insulted you?"
"By comparing us to these primitives," Telmar said,
glancing at Thorn, who nodded. Fulgrim frowned. "And why should he not?" Fulgrim looked around, noting the mood of the crowd. They were on the cusp of flight. Telmar's sudden burst of violence had frightened them, shaken them to their very cores. Stories would spread, flying through the city, and from there the rest of the continent. Awe would turn to fear, fear to resentment, and resentment to resistance. He had seen the same story repeated ad nauseum on a dozen worlds. Fulgrim had always preferred love to fear. Love was stronger. Fear could be conquered, but love, never. It waned and swelled, but it never truly faded. He had made himself loved on Chemos, and he would do the same here. The Primarch sank to one knee and reached down to help Telmar's victim to his feet. The man stared at him with mingled fright and awe, his mouth working soundlessly. Fulgrim smiled and stood. "I came from nothing," he said, fixing his sons with a steady gaze. "I scrabbled in the quarry pits and down in the deepest mines, carrying buckets on my shoulders because the ascender blew a gasket," he said. "I broke my fingernails on raw ore and grew blisters from heat and labour. You look down on them, blind to the beauty of their struggle, blind to what they might become if only someone would scrape the filth from their faces." He reached down and lifted a child onto his shoulders. The girl laughed and clapped, unafraid of the giant, even as her mother wept. Fulgrim indicated the crowd. His voice had driven many of them to their knees. "Look at them, my sons. You are the highest, and they the lowest. It is your duty to raise them up, as high as they will go. Anything less is not worthy of you." Lanced by a perfect thrust. Even as he said it, he felt a twinge of something. Guilt, perhaps, or regret. As with the sulphur on Chemos, he had been forced to eradicate the Sabasian Brotherhood in order to save Byzas. It did not sit well with him, but he did not see how it could have been otherwise. Or was it simply that he did not wish to see it? The thought brought him up short. Desire and purpose. Which had driven him? Had Belleros been right? Did it even matter? In victory, his superiority was proven. Messages of congratulations were already coming in, some more grudging than others. He had succeeded. He had proven himself, proven the superiority of his legion. But still, He thought of the kneeling assassins, waiting patiently for his blade, and wondered.
Hindsight is wonderful for smoothing the rough edges, isn't it?
Pike's question struck him like a fist. He looked at her. What's that supposed to mean?
Hardly perfect, was it? How many thousands dead? How much destruction?
The questions were pointed, and the same ones he'd been asking himself. Fulgrim felt a flash of irritation. Did she think he was not aware of the cost? Its perfection is obvious. Compliance was achieved and stability ensured. In a few weeks, with barely a handful of warriors, I accomplished what would have taken my brothers months, and hundreds, if not thousands, of warriors. It was a boast, but a truthful one. He lowered the transonic blade, quieting its hum. I have acquired a new world for the Imperium at minimal cost, and a new source for potential aspirants for my legion. More, I have proven my ability to any who might doubt it.
Or maybe you've proven that they were right all along.
Fulgrim shook his head, annoyed.
If that's the case, then there is nothing that will convince them otherwise.
Pike frowned.
I've been reading those Sabasian treatises you found, she said,
indicating the books scattered on the table before her.
Desire and purpose and all that. It makes for an interesting look into the mind of our late enemies. There's much to be learned from them.
I have already seen to it that their martial teachings are integrated into our combat training. It will prove invaluable to my warriors, of that I have no doubt. That they'd almost carved Sirius out of his armor was proof enough of that.
And their philosophy?
Fulgrim hesitated. What of it? Pike sighed and picked up one of the books.
The search for perfection is a subtle drug, she read. It draws the mind along circuitous routes, deeper and deeper into itself, until nothing can be seen except the ideal. Desire blinds one to purpose, and thus renders true perfection impossible.
But is attainment of the ideal not worth such a torturous journey? Fulgrim said. Only through desire can perfection be imagined and attained.
Some would say that the journey itself is more important.
Some have more patience than me. Pike acknowledged the point.
Then you must ask yourself this. Is the ideal you seek worth the cost?
She hesitated.
This could have all gone very wrong, Fulgrim. You were almost killed at Sabasius at Anabas, whether you admit it or not. You let your pride blind you, and walked into a trap designed to kill a demigod.
And I walked out again, Fulgrim said softly. He didn't look at her.
But Sirius almost didn't. Corinth and his fellows almost killed him.
Fulgrim turned. Casualties are the price of victory. Pike frowned.
And that is the very excuse those bureaucrats you so detest use to reason away the neglect of your sons. Their lives were spent like bullets, one after the next, to buy victory after victory. I thought you wanted to find a better way, Phoenician.
Fulgrim tensed, angry. He looked down at her, so old and frail. A single twitch of his hand would serve to shatter her irrevocably. She could feel his anger. He knew she must. But she did not look away. Pike was not speaking for herself. She was speaking with the voice of terror, the voice of Malcador, and ultimately the Emperor. Worse, she was not wrong. He had acted foolishly, thinking himself clever. His desire for the perfect thrust had blinded him to the desperation of his enemies. He had left them no choice but to kill him, for the good of their world. The thought of his failure was like acid on his mind. How would his brothers judge him should they learn of it? He remembered Corinth kneeling before him, the serenity of his smile. Had he achieved perfection in his final moments? The thought haunted Fulgrim. He replayed the moment over and over again in his head, studying it from every angle. Why had Corinth allowed himself to die? Had he too been proving a point? In those final moments, had he won the duel between desire and purpose? Fulgrim forced the anger down. "I misjudged the situation," he said. "You are right. My desire to prove myself got the best of me, and I made an error in judgment." He paused. Several, in fact. Pike blinked, surprised. Fulgrim allowed himself a smile. Whatever she thought, she did not quite have the measure of him. His brothers might internalize their flaws, but only by admitting his own would he achieve the perfection he sought. "Desire and purpose," he said. He tapped the stack of treatises. "Perhaps you're right about their philosophy as well. It might be the tempering my sons need, if they are to reach their full potential."
Fulgrim nodded in greeting as Ferrus reached towards a sword belted at his waist, and he smiled as he recognized Fireblade's hilt. "You remade my sword," said Fulgrim, his voice cutting through the atrocious din of fighting. Though the ferocious battle between the Morlocks and the Phoenix Guard surrounded them, neither Primarch's Praetorians dared approach them, as though aware that to transgress this fateful confrontation would be a heinous crime. "Only to see you dead by a weapon forged by my own hand," spat Ferrus. In response, Fulgrim sheathed his silver sword and reached behind him to unlimber the great warhammer held at his back. "Then I shall do likewise." The great weight of Forgebreaker, the weapon his own skill and energies had crafted beneath the peaks of Mount Narodnia, felt good in his hands as he descended the rock to face his erstwhile brother. "It is fitting we face one another with the weapons we forged long ago," said Fulgrim. "I have long waited for this moment, Fulgrim," replied Ferrus, "ever since you came to me with betrayal in your heart. For months I have dreamt of this reckoning. Only one of us will walk away from this. You know that." "I know that," agreed Fulgrim. "You betrayed the Emperor, and you betrayed me," said Ferrus, and Fulgrim was surprised to hear genuine emotion in his brother's voice. "I came to you because of our friendship, not despite it," answered Fulgrim. "The universe is changing, the old order upset, and a new dawn approaching. I offered you the chance to be part of the new order, but you threw it back at me." "You sought to make me a traitor," snarled Ferrus. "Horus is mad. Look at all this death. How can this be right? You will hang from traitor's gibbet for this sedition, for I am the Emperor's loyal servant, and through me his will and vengeance will be done." "The Emperor is a spent force," snapped Fulgrim. "Even now he whittles away on some trivia in the dungeons of Terror, while his realm is in flames. Are those the actions of a being fit to rule the galaxy?" "Do not think you can win me to your cause, Fulgrim. You failed once, and you will not get a second chance." Fulgrim shook his head. "I am not offering you a second chance, Ferrus. It is already too late for you and your warriors." Ferrus laughed at him, but he could sense the despair in it. "Are you mad, Fulgrim? It's over. You and the War Master are defeated, your forces are routed, and the power of another 4 legions will soon crush your attempt at rebellion utterly." Fulgrim was unable to keep the sensation seething in his head contained any longer, and he shook his head as he savoured his next words. "My brother, how naive you are. Do you really think Horus would be foolish enough to trap himself like this? Look to the north, and you will see that it is you who are undone. Hundreds of World-Eaters, sons of Horus and the Death Guard, fell upon the veteran companies of the Iron Hands, and though the warriors of the 10th Legion continued to fight gallantly, they were hopelessly outnumbered and would soon be hacked to pieces." Ferrus Manus turned to face Fulgrim, and the Primarch of the Emperor's children could see the despair etched into his brother's features, his silver eyes dull and lifeless. To have so great a victory snatched away in an instant must be the most sublime sensation. Fulgrim almost wished to switch places with his brother, just to taste that feeling for himself. "Only dismal defeat and death await you, Ferris," said Fulgrim. "Horus has commanded your death, but for the sake of our past friendship, I shall plead your case to him if you throw down your arms. You have to surrender, Ferris. There is no escape." Ferrus Manus tore his eyes from the slaughter of the loyalist forces, his teeth bared with the volcanic fury of his homeworld. "Maybe not, traitor, but only dishonor holds any terror for me," spat Ferrus. "The Emperor's loyal warriors will not surrender to you, not now, not ever. You will have to kill every last one of us." "So be it," said Fulgrim, launching himself towards Ferrus Manus, swinging his mighty warhammer. The Primarch's weapons, forged in brotherhood but wielded in vengeance, met in a blazing plume of energy, and the battlefield was illuminated for hundreds of meters by their ferocious energies. The two Primarchs traded blows with their monstrously powerful weapons, the strength to defeat armies and topple mountains unleashed as they fought like gods, forced to end their dispute in the realm of mortals. Ferrus Manus wielded his flaming blade in fiery slashes, his every blow defeated by the ebony-hafted hammer he had borne in countless campaigns. Fulgrim swung his hammer in great looping arcs, its heavy head powerful enough to crush the armor of a titan to paste. Both warriors fought with hatred only brothers divided can muster, their armor dented, torn and blackened by the fury of their conflict. To fight an opponent of such magnificence was a privilege, and Fulgrim savoured every clash of hammer and sword, every fiery line cut across his flesh, and every grunt of pain torn from his brother's mouth as Forgebreaker glanced his armor. They circled in the midst of cries of pain and roaring savage glee, the Morlocks of Ferrus Manus slain, but for a last few desperate heroes. Ferrus cut the shoulder guard from Fulgrim's armor and spun inside his guard to deliver a lethal thrust towards his groin. Fulgrim stepped to meet the blow, batting aside the tip of the fiery sword with the haft of Forgebreaker, and hammering the warhammer's head towards Ferrus's skull. The Primarch of the Iron Hands took the blow, dropping to one knee and lashing out with his blade as blood streamed from the terrible wound in his temple. The sword's fiery tip cut across Fulgrim's stomach, opening his armor and tearing through his flesh. The pain was indescribable, and Fulgrim fell back, dropping his hammer as his hands sought to stem the blood pouring from his body. Both Primarchs faced each other on their knees through a haze of pain and blood, and Fulgrim once again felt an ache of sadness well within him. The pain of his wounds and the sight of his brother's broken skull coated in blood tore a window into his mind. The sensation was like a powerful gust of fresh mountain air clearing away the fog that had wrapped him in a suffocating embrace for so long that he no longer noticed it until it was gone. "My brother," he whispered. "My friend." "You have long since lost the right to call me friend," snarled Ferrus, pushing himself to his feet and staggering towards Fulgrim with fireblade raised to smite him. Fulgrim cried out, and his hand leapt unbidden to his waist as the flaming blade carved a burning path towards his neck. Silver steel flashed as he drew the sword he had taken from the Lair Temple, and blocked the descending weapon. Ferrus's sword hissed and spat as it bit into the silver blade, the Primarch of the Iron Hand's strength forcing the blazing metal centimetre by centimetre towards Fulgrim's face. "No!" cried Fulgrim. "This is not right!" The amethyst stone at the hilt of Fulgrim's sword pulsed with an evil light, bathing Ferrus Manus's face in a leering purple glare. Energy streamed from the blade, and musky smoke billowed around them, deadening sounds and obscuring sight. Fulgrim felt a monstrous presence swell around him, its power and nameless essence more intoxicating and dreadful than anything he could ever have imagined. Diabolical strength flooded his limbs, and he pushed against the power of Ferrus Manus, feeling his brother's surprise at his resistance. With a cry of animal rage, he surged to his feet and hurled Ferrus Manus back, spinning and lashing out with his sword. The silver edge bit deep into the breastplate of his brother's armor, and the Primarch of the Iron Hands cried out, falling to his knees once again, as the blade's flaring energies parted his dark armor like a fingernail through cold grease. Hot blood sprayed from the wound, and fire blades slid from Ferrus's hand as he gasped in fierce agony. "Finish him! Kill him!" the voice screamed, and to Fulgrim it seemed as though it echoed across time and space, as well as within his skull. He staggered with the blunt force of its imperative, lurching as though his limbs were not his to control. His normal grace and elan were forsaken as he falteringly raised the silver sword in preparation of delivering the death blow to Ferrus Manus. Unknown energies coruscated along the notched blade and down the length of his arms into the meat and bone of his wounded body. Fulgrim was wreathed in purple fire. Crackling arcs of lightning caressed him with a lover's tenderness, seeking out his open wounds and licking them with bale fire as they sought entry to his flesh. Fulgrim stood above Ferrus Manus, his chest heaving convulsively as his entire body shook with the violence of the power that sought to claim him. "He must die, otherwise he will kill you!" Fulgrim looked down at his defeated opponent and saw his own reflection in the mirrors of Ferrus's eyes. In an instant that stretched for an eternity, he saw what he had become, and what monstrous betrayal he had allowed himself to be party to. He knew in that eternal moment that he had made a terrible mistake in drawing the sword from the Lair temple, and he fought to release the damnable blades that had brought him so low. His grip was locked onto the weapon, and even as he recognized how far he had fallen, he knew that he had come too far to stop. The realization, coupled with the knowledge that everything he had striven for had been a lie. As though moving in slow motion, Fulgrim saw Ferrus Manus reaching for his fallen sword, his fingers closing around the wire-wound grip, the flames leaping once more to the blade at its creator's touch. "Kill him before he kills you! No!" Fulgrim's blade seemed to move with a life of its own, but it had no need of such impellence, for he swung the blade of his own volition. The silver blade clove the air as it swept towards Ferrus Manus, and Fulgrim felt the ancient triumph of the presence that he now knew had dwelt within it all this time. He tried desperately to pull the blow, but his muscles were no longer his own to control. Unnatural warp-forged steel met the iron flesh of a Primarch, its aberrant edge cutting through Ferrus's skin, muscle, and bone with a shrieking howl that echoed in realms beyond those knowable to mortals. Blood and the monumental energies bound within the meat and gristle of one of the Emperor's sons erupted from the wound, and Fulgrim fell back as the searing powers blinded him, dropping the silver sword at his side. He heard a shrieking wail as of a choir of banshees whip around him as phantom skeletal hands clawed at him, and 1,000 voices tore at his mind. He landed heavily and rolled onto his side, heaving great gulps of cold air into his lungs as the sound of battle returned to him. He heard cries of pain, gunfire, explosions, and the rhythmic crack of bolters as they fired relentless volley after volley. It was the sound of death. It was the sound of a massacre. His entire body aching with pain and loss, Fulgrim pushed himself upright. Blood and the detritus of battle surrounded him, the stoic figures of armored warriors staring in wonder at the headless body that lay on the black ground before him. Fulgrim took a shuddering breath and raised his hands to the heavens, screaming his loss at the sight of his brother so cruelly murdered. "What have I done?" he howled. "Throne, save me! What have I done?" What needed to be done? "He's dead," whispered Fulgrim, the aching loss and guilt of his crime too monstrous to believe. "I killed him." "Yes, you did. With your own hands you struck down your brother, he who had only thought well of you and fought faithfully with you through all the long years. He was my brother." "He was, and all he ever did was honor you.